Hello, and welcome to Top Shelf Books. If you're joining us for the first time, we are going to hopefully add some new titles, off the beaten track titles to your TBR, and also maybe cover some familiar favorites. Today's episode is all about dogs, and you can thank one of my Tumblr followers who requested this. And I actually found so much information, we're going to end up with a two-part episode. So, episode 6, part 1. And the dog, if you are watching as well as listening on your screen, this is Amish, who got her name from being adopted in Amish country. I don't know that it's entirely politically correct, but I was a child at the time, so I didn't do the naming. But I wanted to include her picture and mention her because when I think of wonderful and amazing dogs, I can't help but think of Amish. She was my four-legged babysitter. When I went to see my grandparents, she would go outside with me, and anytime anyone who was a stranger came into the yard, she would plant herself around me like a little fortress, and she would not let me out of her legs until she was certain everything was safe. And once she even dragged my mom away from me, gently, by the sleeve, because there was a pair of scissors in between us, and she was not having that. So she was a wonderful animal, and she gets the dedication for today's episode. Because this is a two-parter, I wanted to kind of touch on what we're talking about today, in case you want to skip to the next part when it gets loaded up. So today we're going to look at the origins and evolution of dogs in books, the way that dogs and people bond, the science surrounding dogs, some individual nonfiction dogs, accounts that people have given of their animals, some books that can help you give your dog a good life, and then some dogs who are on the job, whether that is in combat or helping law enforcement or in civilian life. So if you are looking for the fiction aspects, that's going to pop up in part 2. To begin to talk about origins when it comes to animals, I always like to mention the book Naming Nature by Carol Kasak-Yoon. It has a chapter that looks at how young children respond to animals, and she talks about the fact that we are all, as children, really good naturalists without any training. So you probably have had some experience with little kids and doing sort of the barnyard sounds, cow goes moo, chicken goes cluck, that sort of thing. But children are very good at sorting animals, and they can sort dogs, for example, Yoon talks about. Even if you show them a Chihuahua and a Great Dane, they know that those are dogs and they go together. And I find that kind of fascinating that we have this sort of um, very deep connection to the creatures in our world, and I'm always advocating for people to learn the plants and animals around them because I think when you know the names, it makes you more likely to understand how those things work together and less likely to do them any kind of harm. So something worth contemplating. Obviously, dogs have been part of our history since almost the beginning of people, and there are different theories about how that came about. Probably they followed us to scavenge from human kills. It's not uncommon for ravens to follow wolves. Wolves may have followed us. But some books that investigate our relationship with dogs, If You Tame Me by Irvine and Domesticated by Francis, both look at sort of our responsibilities when it comes to domesticating animals and what we kind of owe them. And so animal shelters should be coming into your mind right now. We created these animals that are no longer wild. What do we owe them? Another couple to think about, The Wolf in the Parlor by Franklin. And unfortunately, this is not a digital text. I've been trying to track down a copy, and I'm going to have to go for a physical copy. And then A Dog in the Cave by Frydenborg, looking at the relationship between wolves and humans. And I can also recommend tons of wonderful books about wolves, but I don't want to get us too far off topic, so we will save the wolves for another day. Two other books that look at the evolution of dogs from their ancestors, Once a Wolf by Sykes and Wolf Within by Ellis. Tamed is broader, it doesn't, by Roberts. it does not just look at dogs, but other species that we have domesticated and how we have changed their worlds, how they have changed our worlds. Our Oldest Companions by Shipman looks at those first dogs and the relationships we formed with them and how those relationships shaped different dog breeds to be guardian dogs, herding dogs, things like that. And if you're interested in the sort of wolf dog discussion controversy, Terrell's Part Wild looks at what it means to live with a dog that isn't quite 100% just a dog. If you've ever had a dog in your life, I don't have to tell you anything about the connections that we make with them, the love that we feel for them. Obviously, many books have been written about our relationship with animals. One of my favorites is Made for Each Other by Allmert, and it looks at the chemicals that we produce in response to interactions with our animals and our relationships with them. I've included a couple of books that are a little more scientific, Companion Animals in Everyday Life and Domestic Animals in Leisure. These are more academic type titles, more fun, relaxing titles, Dog Love by Garber and Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home by Sheldrake. It also is a little broader. It looks at animals beyond just dogs, and it always makes me think of the story of Hachi. Citizen Canine by Grimm looks at the rights we are extending to animals. So I know that you may be like me and feel like we're going backwards in our world right now, that so many rights are threatened and so many terrible things are happening. But there is a push to see animals on more on our level in a better light, to extend them more rights. So hopefully that continues to progress. I also included Our Dogs, Ourselves, so the story of that animal bond. And this is by Alexandra Horowitz. I'm going to be mentioning her several times throughout. She is kind of a big deal when it comes to dog publications, and her books are really wonderful. Moving from origins to history, our history intersects with canine history, obviously. So the lost history of the canine race and the paw prints of history, these are both really broad, long histories of our relationships with dogs. A dog's history of the world and a dog's history of America are a little more narrow, and in those you can find stories of famous dogs. These are fun histories because you don't have to read straight through. You can sort of dip in and out to catch the stories and meet new, beautiful, devoted, loyal, any kind of dog you can imagine is going to pop up in there. The science of dogs. So, how do dogs work? How do we understand how dogs work? There's been a lot of science devoted to this. And again, I want to mention a piece of good news, and that is that a great many testing facilities have done away with testing that is done on dogs, and those dogs have been placed in homes. So, we are backing away from those things, and that is a good piece of news. So, titles for looking inside of our dogs and how we understand them: The Difficulty of Being a Dog, Man Meets Dog, How Dogs Work, How Dogs Love Us. And that one I especially like because it's a neuroscientist, and I think it's fascinating when we try to think across different minds and we find similarities instead of differences. So scientists have done this, for example, with the octopus or the dolphin. There are books about that as well. So here's one with dogs. Two books by Horowitz that look inside of dogs. Inside of a Dog is one of them, and Being a Dog. Being a Dog is my favorite because it talks about how dogs use their sense of smell, how it's different from our own, and it really is amazing in terms of how they decode the world versus how we decode the world. So if you've ever been tugging your dog away from something, they may be obviously getting a lot more information than you, and this can help you appreciate what it is they might be up to. Some more dog science. I've included some older titles here. So Thomas's The Hidden Life of Dogs has been around a while, but she's a wonderful writer, so I thought I would suggest her to you. The Dog and Natural History comes from a series. You can find a lot of natural history books in that same series. But if you're just looking for an overview of dogs and the science behind dog evolution, it is a good one. What the Dog Knows is another book that looks at how dogs use scent to perceive their world and to take in their world. So it's a good companion piece for being a dog. What's a Dog For? Some philosophy there as well as history. And then Wonder Dog is the newest title on this list by Howard, basically looking at how the science of dogs has taught us information that has changed how we look at science in general. Everyone, of course, believes that their dog is the best dog, and everyone is right. This is how I feel about my cats as well, by the way. Um, so it was difficult to look through books and try to decide what individual dogs to look at. So I chose Just Dogs for Photography. These are hunting dogs. So if you are sensitive to dogs carrying around other creatures, maybe give that one a pass. But they are beautiful dogs. I chose 3 Days with George by Campbell just because it's a giant dog and there's something wonderful to me about the people that open their lives and their hearts to monster dogs. My Dog Tulip by Akerley is a classic. Dog Years by Doty looks at several dogs, and then Comet's Tail is about rescue dogs. Obviously, there are lots of rescue dog books out there. I really struggled to narrow things down for our discussion. There's so much. So if there's something that you think really needs to be on the list, please let me know. I'm always on the lookout for books whose acquaintance I have not yet made. If you've opened your heart and your life to a dog, one of the things that is probably on your mind is how to give that dog the best possible life that you can. And one of the trends that is happening in capitalism, we usually don't talk about capitalism in the sense of anything good happening, but it has seized on the idea of giving our pets better items. So a book like The Clean Pet Food Revolution can help us look at how we feed our animals better. And of course, there are a lot of companies on that bandwagon. Wag by Todd and Dog Sense by Bradshaw both look at how dogs work, basically, how their inner world works so that we can respond to that and give them a good life. And then The Secret History of Kindness is about how dogs learn. If you've ever had to take a dog to obedience school or try to train a dog, this can give you some insights into how you can make things more palatable both for them and for yourself. And the rest of our discussion focuses on dogs who are doing jobs, dogs who are out there in the world. So I wanted to introduce you to some various dogs with jobs. Werewolf by Hedges is a police dog. Of course, I'm not out to give you any police propaganda, but that is one area where dogs are often used. Wild Voice of the North by Karagar, an Eskimo dog, a sledding dog. Herding Dogs of the World by Hartnagel Taylor. Lots and lots of dogs around the world that help with guarding livestock. Dogs with Jobs by Greaves. This one has some really, really cute photography. So not only are there dogs out there doing jobs, but they're looking adorable while they do it. The newest one on the list is A Dog's Devotion by Elsholt, and this is looking at search and rescue. And I was really astounded to learn in another book I'll mention shortly how much search and rescue work is volunteer and what a mental strain it can take on the dog. So, for example, the 9/11 dogs became very depressed because they did not find anyone living, obviously, in that tragedy. And I had never considered that that would impact dogs, and that was a really wonderful thing to learn and to consider. I already mentioned herding dogs, but I've also included some sheep dogs. Again, there are so many books out there for these. So, Eminent Dogs and Dangerous Men by McCaig is about the culture of sheepdogs and raising them, but it's also about trying to find a dog for yourself. And many of us have gone on that journey of, wanting a particular type of dog and trying to find that dog. A Shepherd's Watch by Kennard, again, some sheepdogs. Working Dogs of the World by Hubbard is an older title, but looks at the various jobs that dogs do. Hunting Dogs of America by Griffin. I will include titles from America from time to time because they're easier for me to access. But if you ever have suggestions for expanding into a more global view, please let me know. I'm not deliberately leaving anyone out. It's just what I have access to and am able to find. If you've ever played with WorldCat and done searches, you know that sometimes you can generate thousands of results. So it's what I kind of have the patience to go through. And I also included a film dog, Rin Tin Tin by Orlean. I don't know if you grew up watching things like Rin Tin Tin or Lassie. They were on TV when I was young, so I remember the Showtime dogs, and I was interested in how they were treated and how they were taught. One of the places our lives intersect with dogs is in disasters, both in how can we help save them from disasters, and that's covered in a book like Filling the Ark by Irvine, and also how they can help us in disasters. One of the first books I remember reading as a little girl was about the St. Bernards that lived with the monks and helped people out with avalanches. So I tracked down the adult version of this, which is Avalanche Dog by Bartosz Hoepner. It's hard to find, but it was a worthwhile endeavor, and it was interesting to learn how those dogs work and how they were trained. A couple other books of dogs helping us so that others may live, Caroline Hurd and her search and rescue dogs. And then Scent of the Missing. This was the one I mentioned earlier when I was talking about The Volunteer, and I loved this book. It talks about rappelling with dogs down the side of buildings, hiding in trunks of cars so dogs can find you. And of course, it's sad because, they are searching for missing people, and sometimes the end of those stories is tragic, but it's also amazing that people will fly from all over the country or all over the world to help with disasters. So really have respect for these people and their animals. I don't know if racing dogs necessarily counts as a working type of dog, and I have mixed feelings about whether or not some of these things should be allowed to do, but they do have a place in culture, so I wanted to include some books of dogs on the run. The Reign of the Greyhound by Brannigan is a history of those dogs. Going to the Dogs by Thayer looks at both the racing of greyhounds, but also the response to it by animal activists. So you can get a pretty balanced view there. Winter Dance by Paulson looks at running the Iditarod. And then I had to include My Lead Dog Was a Lesbian, also that race across the north by O'Donoghue. I just really enjoyed the title, and I started flipping through, and the author was very humorous and very blunt about the challenges that one faces on this race. Again, I'm still not sure that I agree that it's necessary to put dogs or humans through such a thing, but I will continue to learn and read. Something that I'm certain we shouldn't put dogs or humans through is war. And of course, right now, there's even more war in the world. So this may be a poignant time to turn to these stories. But I did want to include stories of dogs who go into combat. It's so hard for me to imagine taking a creature into combat. It feels to me not that different from taking a child. They don't have a choice, they can't understand, but they do love their people. So, Dogs of Courage by Rogak, From Baghdad with Love About Bringing a Dog Home, Hero Dogs by Melville. These became disaster search dogs. No Better Friend, Weintraub, and then Bonzo's War, Campbell. I want to urge you to use caution with this one. There were dog and cat massacres in World War II overseas uh, during the Blitz, so some of that information may appear, and if you're an animal lover, it can be difficult to read. There are books specifically on that and why it was done and how it was handled. I would not have surrendered my cats to anyone. I would be in jail with my cats, I suppose. But different times and different choices. And a few more War Dogs. War Dog by Damian Lewis, War Dogs by Rebecca Frankel, and then Nobody Left Behind by Terry Crisp. I want to highlight, when I was teaching a course on human animal studies, I learned that it was military policy up until the early 2000s to leave war animals in the country where they had served, and I was horrified by this, and I started to follow the soldiers and the administrators who fought for this policy to be changed. So it's really interesting. And of course, there are books about the history of all different sorts of animals in combat. You can see really beautiful memorials that have been done to horses in World War One, for example. So I do not think the people that are involved in these situations are ignorant to the cost to the animals, the strain on the animals. I don't believe that they lack compassion, but it is a very fraught topic, and there are a lot of books about it. That brings us to the end of today's list. I don't know what the weather looks like where you are, but I'm having a beautifully gloomy fall day, drizzling rain. It's kind of dark. It's the perfect kind of day to visit your local library to read a book. So here are some of the titles from today. I hope that you found something to add to your TBR, something that maybe you haven't encountered before. A few more titles. I was having a blast with Microsoft's stock images to find you some cute dogs to include here at the end. So I'm just imagining petting all their heads. A few more titles. Don't tell me you don't want to kiss that nose. A few more titles. Still more titles with a wolfy type dog. And appropriately for the season, here are some costumed pups. I would love to see these guys coming to my door for treats. As always, thank you for tuning in with us. I hope that you found some wonderful books to read. You are always welcome to get in touch with me at navalianlibrary@gmail.com or at Books in Piles on Tumblr. And I hope that you get some wonderful reading time in this week. If you have some furry friends in your life or nearby, give them some pats from me.